The blue of the Pacific Ocean looked infinite that morning, the kind of flat, glass-like surface that makes you forget there are 3 miles of black water right beneath your feet. Dougal Robertson stood at the helm of the Lucette, a sturdy 43-foot wooden schooner that had become his family's entire world. For 18 months, they had traded the predictable rhythms of a Scottish dairy farm for the unpredictable currents of the globe, chasing a dream of freedom that felt completely within reach. His wife, Lynn, was nearby, keeping an eye on the children, 18-year-old Douglas, 11-year-old twins Neil and Sandy, and a 22-year-old family friend named Robin Williams who had joined them in Panama. They were bound for the Galapagos Islands, navigating a stretch of sea about 200 miles west of the Costa Rican coast, completely unaware that their world was about to shatter in less than 60 seconds. It happened with a sound that none of them had ever heard before, a deep, metallic-sounding crunch that vibrated right through the soles of their bare feet. The Lucette did not just shudder. She was lifted violently out of the water, tilting at an angle so sharp that the coffee pot flew off the galley stove and shattered against the bulkhead. Before Dougal could even shout a warning, a second impact rocked the hull, followed immediately by the terrifying, unmistakable sound of rushing water. Standing on the deck, Douglas looked over the side and saw 3 massive, dark shapes slicing through the water, their distinctive white patches gleaming just beneath the surface. A pod of killer whales had targeted the boat, and within seconds, they had punched 3 massive holes straight through the solid oak hull, leaving the Robertson family with only moments to face an impossible choice. Water poured into the cabin with the force of a wide-open fire hydrant, rising past the floorboards before Dougal could even descend the companionway stairs. He screamed for everyone to abandon ship, his voice cracking with an urgency that instantly froze the children's blood. Lynn grabbed the emergency ration she had packed weeks prior, while Dougal fought his way toward the inflatable life raft lashed to the deck, his hands slick with salt water and sweat as he hacked at the ropes with a pocket knife. The schooner was settling fast, her bow dipping lower into the swell with every passing second as the air trapped inside the hull hissed out through the vents. With a final, agonizing groan of wood and tearing canvas, the Lucette slid backward into the depths, leaving 6 people bobbing in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth with nothing but a fragile rubber raft and a tiny fiberglass dinghy to their names. The sudden silence that washed over the water was louder than the crash of the attack, broken only by the sound of the twins sobbing as they clung to their mother in the cramped interior of the raft. The killer whales were gone, leaving behind a slick of diesel fuel and a handful of floating debris that mocked the family's sudden, absolute isolation. Dougal sat in the center of the bouncing rubber ring, his mind racing through their inventory. A bag of onions, a tin of biscuits, a few oranges, a jar of glucose sweets, and enough fresh water to last the 6 of them maybe 10 days if they were strictly rationed. They were hundreds of miles from the nearest shipping lane, completely invisible to the rest of the world, and the realization began to dawn on them that no one was looking for them because no one even knew they were missing. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon on that first afternoon, the temperature dropped rapidly, and the reality of their physical condition set in. They were soaked to the skin with salt water, their clothes clinging to their bodies as the wind picked up, sending cold spray over the low sides of the inflatable raft. Dougal looked at the fiberglass dinghy, named the Edna Mare, which they had managed to tow along behind them, recognizing it as their only real hope for steering a course toward land. The rubber raft had no keel, no sail, and no way to resist the powerful currents that were already carrying them further out into the empty expanse of the sea. Every member of the family understood without a word being said that their survival would depend entirely on their ability to endure things they had never imagined possible, starting with the very night that was now swallowing them whole. The darkness of the first night brought a terrifying sense of claustrophobia, despite the vast openness of the ocean around them. The raft bucked and rolled on the swells, causing constant, agonizing seasickness that left everyone weak and dehydrated before the first 24 hours had even passed. Dougal and Douglas took turns staying awake, staring into the blackness for the running lights of a ship, though they knew the odds of a vessel passing through this specific sector were microscopically small. Every splash against the rubber hull made their hearts skip, the memory of the whales still raw and vivid in their minds, leaving them to wonder if another attack was coming from the depths below. When the dawn finally broke, casting a pale gray light over the water, it revealed 6 exhausted, salt-crusted faces that already looked vastly different from the family that had breakfasted on a yacht just 24 hours earlier. By the 3rd day, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by the grinding reality of thirst and hunger that began to pull at their sanity. The oranges and onions were gone, consumed in tiny, strictly measured pieces that did little to alleviate the dry, sticky feeling in their throats. Dougal instituted a strict regime, appointing Douglas as his second-in-command and assigning tasks to the twins to keep their minds from focusing on the vast emptiness surrounding them. They used a small piece of canvas to try and catch the morning dew, scraping the precious drops into a container with their fingers, an agonizingly slow process that yielded only a few sips of metallic-tasting water. The heat during the middle of the day became an oppressive, heavy weight, baking their skin and causing painful salt sores to break out along their legs and backs where the wet clothing rubbed against them. On the 5th day, the horizon remained completely empty, a flat line that seemed to mock their hopes every time the raft lifted to the top of a swell. Their water supply was dwindling faster than Dougal had anticipated, forcing him to cut the daily ration to a mere fraction of a cup per person, just enough to wet their cracked lips and swollen tongues. The twins, Neil and Sandy, showed incredible resilience, sitting quietly in the center of the raft and listening to their mother tell stories of their old farm in Scotland, their voices faint against the constant sloshing of the waves. Robin, the young friend who had joined them for an adventure, sat quietly near the bow, his face pale and drawn as he stared at his hands, perhaps realizing the true cost of the voyage he had signed up for. The weather, which had been relatively calm for the first week, began to change on the 9th day as heavy, dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them the promise of water, but also the threat of destruction. The wind picked up, whipping the tops of the waves into white foam that spilled over the sides of the raft, forcing everyone to bail furiously with their bare hands and a single plastic cup. The temperature plummeted, and the family huddled together for warmth, their bodies shaking uncontrollably as the rain finally came down in torrential sheets. They managed to catch several gallons of the fresh water using their sailcloth, drinking deeply for the first time in days. But the victory was short-lived as the storm grew more violent, threatening to flip the unstable rubber raft into the churning sea. For 12 hours, they fought the ocean for their lives, their muscles aching from the constant strain of bailing and holding onto the structural ropes of the raft. The rubber fabric, weakened by the constant exposure to salt water and the intense tropical sun, began to lose its rigidity, the tubes softening until the sides of the raft bowed inward under the pressure of the waves. Dougal realized with a sinking heart that the raft was dying, it seemed splitting slowly but surely, and that it would not survive another heavy pounding from the sea. He looked at the tiny, 9-foot fiberglass dinghy bobbing violently on its painter line behind them, knowing that their time in the relative comfort of the raft was rapidly drawing to a close. On the 17th day, the floor of the rubber raft finally gave way completely, filling with water and forcing all 6 of them to scramble into the tiny Edna Mare. The shift was a logistical nightmare. 6 people, along with what few supplies they had left, had to fit into a boat designed for 3, leaving them with only inches of freeboard above the waterline. They were packed so tightly that no one could move a limb without shifting the weight of everyone else, requiring absolute stillness to prevent the little dinghy from capsizing. The physical discomfort increased tenfold, as they were now forced to sit in a permanent, cramped position with their knees pressed against their chests, their feet submerged in the bilge water that constantly leaked through the hull. Despite the desperate conditions, the move to the Edna Mare brought a strange new sense of purpose to the family, as the little boat could actually be steered using an improvised pair of oars. Dougal and Douglas took turns rowing, pulling against the massive weight of the water and their own exhaustion in an attempt to make headway toward the coast of South America. Their progress was agonizingly slow, measured in yards rather than miles, but it gave them a sense of agency that they had completely lacked while drifting helplessly in the rubber raft. They became a finely tuned survival machine, each person understanding their role implicitly, from the twins who helped bail the water to Lynn who managed the distribution of their microscopic rations. Food became their primary obsession, their bodies burning through their remaining fat reserves and beginning to consume muscle tissue to keep their organs functioning. Dougal turned his attention to the wildlife that swarmed beneath the boat, realizing that the Edna Mare had become a floating reef, attracting small fish and large predators alike. Using a knife lashed to a broken oar, he managed to spear a small shark that had been circling the boat, dragging the thrashing creature onto the gunwale with the help of Douglas. The catch was a massive turning point. They drank the shark's blood for nutrients and moisture and ate the raw, rubbery flesh, ignoring the foul taste out of sheer, primal desperation for sustenance. The shark meat gave them a temporary burst of energy, but it also brought a new danger, as the scent of blood in the water attracted larger, more aggressive predators to the little boat. Massive sharks, some nearly as long as the Edna Mare itself, began to bump against the fiberglass hull, their rough skins scraping against the bottom with a sound that terrified everyone on board. Douglas stood watch with the improvised spear, ready to jab at any shark that got too close to the vulnerable gunnels, his young face hardened by the weeks of constant, life-or-death pressure. The family learned to live alongside the monsters of the deep, developing a strange, detached tolerance for the shadows that constantly glided beneath their feet. By the 25th day, their skin had turned a deep, leathery brown, covered in painful boils and sores from the constant exposure to salt, sun, and friction. Their hair was matted with salt crystals, and their eyes were sunken deep into their skulls, giving them the appearance of ghosts floating across the water. Yet, their spirits remained remarkably unbroken, sustained by a fierce, collective determination that refused to allow any single member of the family to give up hope. Lynn continued to lead them in daily prayers and songs, her voice thin but steady, providing a psychological anchor that kept the dark thoughts of despair at bay during the longest, hottest hours of the day. They developed an extraordinary method for catching turtles, which frequently floated near the surface of the water around the dinghy. Dougal would lean precariously over the side, supported by Douglas holding his legs, and grab the turtle by its hind flippers, flipping the heavy, thrashing animal into the boat with a massive heave. The turtles provided them with fresh meat, fat, and most importantly, a source of drinkable fluid found within their spinal columns and tissues, which helped supplement the irregular rainfall. Every successful catch was celebrated as a major victory, a sign that they were mastering the hostile environment that had threatened to swallow them whole just weeks before. On the 31st day, the water supply ran out completely again, and the sky remained a cruel, cloudless blue that offered no hope of rain. Their tongues swelled so much that they could barely speak, their voices reduced to harsh whispers as they tried to comfort one another through the intense pain of advanced dehydration. Dougal knew they were reaching the absolute limit of human endurance, that their bodies could not sustain this level of deprivation for much longer before their organs began to fail. He looked at his children, their small frames skeletal and weak, and felt a profound weight of responsibility that drove him to keep rowing, even when his hands were bleeding and his muscles screamed for rest. The breakthrough came on the 35th night, when a massive thunderstorm broke over their position, unleashing a deluge of rain that felt like a miracle from above. They worked frantically in the darkness, catching the water in every container they possessed, drinking until their bellies were full and their skin felt cool for the first time in weeks. The rain washed the salt from their bodies, soothing their sores and giving them a profound sense of renewal that revitalized their determination to survive. The next morning, the sun rose on a family that had looked into the abyss and refused to blink, their bond closer than it had ever been during their years on land. On the 37th day, July 22nd, 1972, Douglas was on watch, his eyes scanning the horizon out of habit rather than expectation. when he saw something that made his heart stop. A low, dark shape was moving across the water in the distance, a shape that did not move like a wave or a cloud. He rubbed his salt-crusted eyes, fearing it was a hallucination brought on by the heat, before screaming out to his father that there was a ship on the horizon. The entire boat erupted into motion, Dougal grabbing their last remaining distress flare, while the others waved their shirts and screamed into the wind, their voices cracking with a desperate intensity. The ship was the Toka Maru, a Japanese fishing vessel that was moving slowly through the area, its crew completely unaware of the tiny drama unfolding a mile away. For 20 agonizing minutes, the family watched as the ship seemed to hold its course, threatening to pass them by and disappear into the vastness of the ocean forever. Dougal fired the flare, a bright red streak that arced across the gray sky, its smoke trail hanging in the air like a desperate question mark. The fishing vessel slowed, its massive bow wave flattening out as it began to turn toward the tiny fiberglass dinghy, confirming that they had finally, against all possible odds, been seen. As the massive steel hull of the Toka Maru loomed over the Edna Mare, the Japanese fishermen looked down in absolute disbelief at the six figures staring back up at them. They saw a family of skeletons covered in sores and oil, yet standing upright in a tiny boat that should have sunk weeks ago, their eyes bright with the realization that their ordeal was over. The crew lowered a ladder and helped the Robertsons climb aboard, their limbs shaking so violently from weakness that they could barely hold the rungs. Once on deck, they were wrapped in warm blankets and given sweet coffee and bread, the simple food tasting like the greatest luxury they had ever known. The Robertson family had survived 38 days at sea, traversing over 700 miles of open ocean in a craft that was never meant to leave the harbor. They had lost their boat, their possessions, and nearly their lives, but they had saved each other through an exhibition of leadership, resourcefulness, and sheer familial love that stunned the world. As the Toka Maru steamed toward port, Dougal looked back at the empty Pacific, knowing that while the ocean had taken everything they owned, it had given them a profound understanding of what truly mattered. The tiny Edna Mare was hoisted onto the deck of the ship alongside them, a battered piece of fiberglass that stood as a permanent monument to the day a family refused to let the ocean divide them.